Hey, welcome to the show. I'm here today with Marti MacEwan. Marti, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great and happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm excited about today. We're going to talk about how to cure stage fright, fear of public speaking, performance anxiety, imposter syndrome, all these things that
Mhm.
you teach other people exactly how to do and how to get over them, which in the nonprofit world, you have to speak all the stinking time. So I think it's very important for our listeners to hear that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many places that what we call stage fright shows up. It isn't just for musicians and performers, it's or actors. It's anybody who needs to get up and do anything in front of anybody.
Mhm. So, hey, give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you really came to this stage fright cure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was a therapist for many years, have been, and I'm still. Um, but when I was about maybe 15 years ago, I decided I wanted to learn to sing. Right? I couldn't even get out the words, I'm a singer. I couldn't say it even. I mean, that was kind of the imposter syndrome part of it. But what really hit me was I went to a first voice lesson just to start to learn to sing solo. I mean, I'd sung in choirs, but that's a whole different deal than getting up in front of people and singing by yourself. And I had a complete panic meltdown singing Mary Had a Little Lamb in front of that first voice teacher, which was complete surprise to me and a complete surprise to her. I had no idea where that extreme fear response came in that moment. And it wasn't until I started to apply some of my knowledge about therapeutic techniques, if you will,
Mhm.
that I discovered why I had that reaction and what to do about it.
That sounds pretty crazy. I'm sure the teacher was like, "What did I get myself into?" We're singing "Mary Has a Little Lamb," which is a very basic song, but the fear was real. It really had a reaction in your world.
The fear was extremely real. And, the fear was not about Mary Had a Little Lamb. It wasn't about the act of singing. It was more, I ran into an internal conflict between who I thought I was and what I was trying to do. And that's one of the things that prompts stage fright of any kind and anybody is like, what am I doing here? And it isn't like you think that consciously. It's more like somewhere inside doing what you're doing isn't a natural fit. Maybe
Mhm.
because of your history, maybe because of things that have happened to you in the past, maybe because there have been unpleasant things about getting up in front of people in your past, any number of things that put you at risk getting up in front of someone and trying to do what you would like to do, but maybe don't feel like you belong doing. That
Oh,
makes
I can
sense.
definitely relate to that. When I got selected for the Seaman to Admiral program, and they send you to college full time, I kept expecting someone to jump out from behind a bush and be like, "Aha, just kidding. Go back and do your enlisted job. Go back and fix airplanes again because this really isn't for you." And I felt that way just about every day of college. The first one in my family to attend university, and felt like I completely didn't belong the entire time I was there. So I can definitely understand how that happens. I have
Hmm.
not had public speaking problems for a few years now, but I remember the first time I really shared my personal story in front of a group, it did not go as well as planned. I got hit with some feelings partway through my speech, and then I just rattled off the rest and got off stage as quickly as possible. So I can definitely understand that. But over the last few years, I've been telling my story over and over and over again. Now it has
Hmm.
no effect on me whatsoever, and I can rattle off all my list of whatever you want to call it without getting an emotional reaction. So I'm happy with my journey, but I definitely understand how people can still be there.
That's awesome. That's awesome that you got to the place where it was so familiar to you to do that that it didn't have the same punch. It didn't have the same. But when you first got up to tell your story and you were revealing things about yourself that maybe you didn't on the regular before that, and being up there visible in front of everybody, kind of what probably felt like bearing your soul, you were at risk of judgment. I would imagine that somewhere
Mhm.
inside your subconscious or maybe even conscious mind, it was risky to put that information out for somebody's judgment. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely. I know we talked a few times before. You mentioned the fear of doing anything for consideration of someone else's enjoyment. I think is how
mhm.
you framed
Yeah,
this.
almost that. The fear of doing anything for someone else's consideration or enjoyment.
Hmm.
Yeah. So what
Yeah.
you were doing there was putting all of this private information out for somebody's consideration.
Hmm.
And and boy, I'm sure the first time you did that, it felt very vulnerable to you. Like,
Oh,
well, how
absolutely.
do you react to this? And then once you got more feedback,
Hmm.
as you did it more and more, you got more feedback like, oh, okay, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. These people are not going to, throw me out on my heels. Um,
Oh,
and then you could,
absolutely.
yeah,
And it's the same for podcasting. When you start podcasting, definitely encourage everyone to start a podcast because you go through this process. Like I didn't know what the heck I was talking about or what I was saying, or I didn't couldn't find my voice or my message in my first 10 or 15 episodes. If you go back, and I encourage you to do so, not because of the quality of content, let me tell you, but to see the journey that even I took as someone that is a podcast host. Because when you hear my latest stuff, you're gonna be like, oh, it's so polished, he's confident, he understands what he's saying. I do now, but man, I didn't when I started. I got no idea what the heck I'm talking about. I have no idea how to rein a guest in. I'm not sure what my message is gonna be. I'm sure my sound quality was a lot worse. Um, and all these things you have to learn over time. But you really have a slick method of laying this out for anyone in any industry that experiences this very same thing.
exactly, exactly. When I started working with musicians and singers and speakers and people who had to do presentations of any kind, I started to see some similarities about what's involved in getting over stage fright. And mostly I work with people who have serious stage fright. I mean, things that get the fear that's getting in their way of doing whatever it is they want to do. Like the, I'm remembering one executive who was going to be promoted to the next level. And he was really hesitating about taking that job because it involved public speaking. In his job that he had, he could get around it, he could avoid it successfully, but he couldn't if he took this new job. So the stakes were pretty high there. Musicians who make their livelihood with their music, but their stage fright is so excruciating that they have serious thoughts about quitting because it's so uncomfortable, right?
Hmm.
So I started working with people for whom getting over their stage fright was important. It wasn't just trivial, it was important. And I saw some elements, if you will, of the process that that were pretty universal, regardless of who it was, what they were doing, how often they had to do it, how many people were watching. Uh, and there are these, and maybe we can go into each one of them a little bit more. One is to get objective about it and figure out, really realize what it is, where it comes from,
Hmm.
why you have it, and that it's not random. It's not random. There's a reason for it. The second is to take that information and build in safety in situations of all kinds, like build in mental ways of thinking about things or physical things to do or practical things and ways of arranging things that build in safety for the individual person. It's all individual. All of this is individual. And then there are two really key things is to dissipate the fear energy. And
Hmm.
I've got a way of doing that. And then the fourth element is to amplify positive energy. And then either quickly or gradually with those four elements, people can start to settle down, focus their energy in a way that actually helps them rather than gets in their way. One of my definitions of confidence is unimpeded energy.
I like that. I
You
like
like
that.
that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of people give me a lot of credit for my confidence, and I don't really have the confidence they think that I have because I decided a long time ago that even if I didn't know what the heck I was talking about, I was going to speak confidently based on the words that I was using. I could confidently say all the words, regardless if I have any kind of connection or confident feeling to the things that I'm talking about. And then for a little bit of fun, it's my goal that if I'm wrong, to say it so confidently that the person questioning me questions whether or not they know what they're talking about. That's kind of a little fun on my side. I'll say something like, "Oh yeah, it's definitely this," and they're like, "Really?" Because I kind of thought it was this. Are you sure? I'm like, and then I pull back the curtain. I'm like, I have no idea. I'm kind of making it up right now. And they're like, man, your confidence. It's like you had me questioning whether I was correct or not. I'm like, perfect. That was my goal to make you question your own confidence and abilities. And I do that. I don't do that to just random people. I do it to some friends of mine who know that I'm going to do it. So it's kind of funny. Not just, a confidence wrecking ball out there, but because I used to be that way, that I wasn't sure what I was doing, and I go in and hem and haw and stutter and all these things. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to decide to be confident in the words that I'm using, and I'm going to roll with it and see how well it works. And it it worked amazing for me, let me tell you.
Well, I want to expound on that a little bit, expound or expand or something. What you're saying is that you didn't require yourself to have confidence in yourself. You
Right.
found a way to have confidence in something,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
a teacher, for instance, for instance, a teacher doesn't necessarily have to have confidence in themselves, but they have confidence in the information that they're putting across.
Yeah, absolutely.
A musician has confidence in the music they're presenting.
Mm-hmm.
And all kinds of situations where you can rethink the situation. That's kind of like the mental reframing I was talking about a minute ago, where you
Yeah.
look at the situation through a different frame, right? And so you see something different, and then you feel differently about it. That's one of the ways you can really create some safety for yourself. And you did that beautifully by saying, well, no, but I can have confidence in the words.
Mm-hmm. I tell you
And
what,
then
it's helped immensely because how often do we know what we're talking about right away when we start something new? Like you don't. You have no idea what you're talking about most of the time, and that's perfectly acceptable and okay. But we don't feel that way when it's happening. Like we feel like we should know, and that doesn't have to be true. But you can find other ways, like we're explaining now, how to be confident. But I would really love if you would take us through the 4 elements of the stage fright cure.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, the first one well, first I want to say they're not like 1, 2, 3, 4 in order.
Mm-hmm.
These are elements, and so I call them elements because I don't want them to be like steps.
It's not a
Because
four-step program.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, okay.
Exactly. But the first one is to get objective. One of the things to really understand at the get-go is that you don't have stage fright by random, as I mentioned earlier. It isn't
Mhm.
like the luck of the draw. It isn't a personality flaw, even. A lot of times people have stage fright and they're thinking, oh, what's wrong with me? Right? It isn't anything wrong with you. It's a triggered response that's happening in your system that's likely unconscious because it comes from some part of your history or your culture or your self-concept that you don't need to have conscious in your mind all the time. It just pops up when the situation arises. All of a sudden,
Mm.
that stuff that you never think about surfaces, and so it feels like out of the blue, right? It feels like where in the, like with my singing thing, it's like, where in the heck did that come from? And so many of my clients say, I know intellectually that it's not scary. I know intellectually the audience is not out to get me. I know intellectually that I know what I'm talking about. But this response that comes from the inside, unbidden seemingly, just
Mhm.
feels so random. But what I want to say is once we start doing the detective work around what is in your system that is prompting this response and get objective about the fact that it isn't just your personality or some flaw, it actually comes from somewhere. then we can start to do the exploration about where does it come from. And
Yeah, and
the other part, go ahead.
I don't think it matters like who you are either. Like I remember going through a public speaking class and they were talking about the director Michael Bay, and Michael Bay has put just some amazing films over the last 15 or 20 years together, just real blockbuster hits. And he went up to do a speech and the projection screen didn't work properly. He got about 30 seconds into his talk and he was going to reference the pictures on the screen and all these different things, and the screen shut down and he didn't know what to do or how to react, and he just walked off the stage and never came back. Now he
Wow.
could have, right? He could have said, we experience technical difficulties like this during directing all the time, and here's how we handle them. But since the screen does not let me talk to you about A, B, and like he could have done that, um, but because he wasn't prepared, regardless of the fact that he's a big time movie director, he got to this place of stage fright when the system went down. He's like, I can't do this, and he ran off stage and never came back out. So it doesn't matter where you're at in life. There's not some special position. Well, if I make it this far in my company, or if I have accomplished these amount of things, then it's just not a thing for me anymore. Even guys like Michael Bay, who make millions of dollars and produce $1 billion movies, can happen to them too.
It absolutely is true. There's a whole list of very famous, very well accomplished people who secretly, not so secretly, because they came out with it, have stage fright
Mm-hmm.
and go through misery, right? One of the things that what you said about his reaction, what happened to him, he froze.
Mm-hmm.
He just froze. Well, when we go into stage fright or fear of any kind, there's fight, flight, and freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And his energy system, if you will, his energy, where he went with that fear was this deer in the headlights, blank, freeze response. And he just had to walk off the stage, right? Because there wasn't anything else to do. So when about getting objective, if you realize that when you have stage fright, you're going to have your own individual reaction to it, like he did.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really fight, flight, or freeze. It's the adrenal system. It's your rev up system that's confronted with some kind of fear and then responds to that fear. And what we can do is dismantle the fear so that then if we could have, right in that moment with Michael Bay, if we could have done some exercises and some techniques to get him out of that freeze place, then he could have reoriented and done just what you described, just to flow with the situation and think on his feet.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. I used to think that if you were a performer or you got to a certain level, like that wasn't a thing, but it's just not true. There's no
It's not.
like special magical qualification you get that says, all of a sudden, like this isn't a thing anymore. It still happens. It happens to a friend of mine, Cody Bobe. He runs Gaborum Studios. He put together an amazing film over the last 2 years. But he's like, before I go out and speak, every time, even though I do a great job at it, I get a little knot in my stomach every time. And he's been on stages week after week after week for years now, and still he gets a little something in his gut before he goes to talk.
Yeah. Well, a little something in his gut probably doesn't stop him.
No.
It's uncomfortable, but it
Yes.
evidently doesn't stop him.
No.
And there are ways to help him calm down, or someone like him to calm down that response so that it doesn't have to bug him every time he does a speech. And one of the things I think is probably good about his situation is he doesn't make it mean very much. That's another piece of the getting objective thing, is just because you have these symptoms doesn't mean that you aren't going to do a good job. It doesn't mean that there's, it's a disaster. And it sounds like he doesn't make it mean very much, and that's to his advantage.
That's cool. I like that. Getting objective. What's the second element?
Well, the second element is to observe what conditions trigger this fear response in you individually. And then arrange things or think about things or or do some physical things that will counteract that response in you, knowing, for instance, I mean, a little story. A friend of mine is a wonderful singer, jazz singer. And whenever she would get on the stage, she would lean against the piano or she'd sit on a stool. And she was just, a wonder to watch and to listen to. Well, I saw her in a totally different situation where she wasn't singing. She was presenting a workshop of sorts. And she got into speaking to the participants, and you could just tell her eyes started to get kind of big, and she started to get a little frozen, and she started to, like, how you can see the wheels turning in someone's head when they're trying to figure out what to say next. And she just got still. I'd never seen her like that before. After about, I'd say about 10 or 15 seconds of that, she looked around the room and she saw a chair over to the side of the room. She brought the chair out and sat down. And as soon as she did that, her fear just dissolved and she just went on with things and was as comfortable as anything. And she didn't even know she'd done it till I talked to her later. But what we figured out was that she was comfortable in contact with something, the piano, the stool, the chair. And when she was just standing up there with no props, nothing to hang on to, she lost her footing. So one of the ways to build in safety for somebody like that would be to actually have a stool there, like intentionally. So intentionally create this experience. Another little story is one guy had a fear of public speaking, but he realized as we were going along that if he got too close to the audience, somehow that triggered something for him. If he moved back, he calmed down. He moved forward, he would get nervous. He moved back, he calmed down. Once we could really, freeze frame the situations that he was nervous in, we could start to arrange things so that he could avoid that reaction or help people think differently about things. So like you do, help people think differently about it so that you can avoid that reaction. On purpose, intentionally create the conditions for safety.
Yeah, I like to acclimate myself to a particular room that I'm going to be in. So one of the ways that I do that is I'll go stand on stage before anyone gets there, or as I don't know, the cocktail hour or the milling around period before something. I'll walk through in between the tables and I'll introduce myself and I'll say hello and understand that these people aren't scary, right? They're just people. And I'll feel my way around the room. I'll get the temperature of the room and how it is, get warmed up. And then once I've done that, I'm acclimated to the environment. Sometimes
Yes.
it doesn't really work out that way, but like you're a musician, you out and you do a sound check, right? You go and you stand and you're on stage and you see that point of view when you're doing a concert in a high school and choir, right? You walk out onto the stage and you see all the chairs. All the chairs are empty, but you can picture, you can visualize what it looks like as a full room and what that is. And getting acclimated seems to help me quite a bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a part of our brain behind our eyes and about as far back as our ears in there on both sides of the center line that is on the lookout for, is this a safe situation or a threatening situation? And so when you do that, when you do the, getting to know people and getting to feel the room, what you're doing is you're helping to reassure that part of your brain that all is well.
Mm.
And for you, that works. For somebody else, what really might work is they hate that stuff, the schmoozing.
Yeah.
That's worse. So what they might want to do is just come on, do their gig. And, that might be something that they would choose to do because it actually makes that part of their brain less reactive instead of more reactive. And that's why creating safety as the element of the stage fright cure is very much an individual thing. People respond very differently to different circumstances and so on. I'm like you. I want to get to know people and reassure that part of my brain that all is well and these are just real people just like me. And, that's very reassuring to me too.
So I spent some time in Newport, Rhode Island, and if you walk around the city of Newport, there's signs that say "M- greet people, say hello, say good afternoon, good evening, good morning." There's little signs that do this. So when you're out walking around and so you see someone and they kind of look at you or don't look at you and you walk by and like you don't really know what to think. But I started taking the signs action. I walk out and hey, good evening. And immediately they say good evening back or good afternoon or whatever. And you realize that there's people like you. And that little interaction that helps you just feel, at least it helped me feel more comfortable with the people I was walking around near and sort of
Yeah.
interacting with, as opposed to just walking by and not saying anything. You're not really sure, what they're up to or whatever. And you say, hey, good evening, how's everybody? And they say, oh, we're all great. You know that you have nothing to fear from that group of people just walking around.
Yeah, and your whole body just relaxes, right? Your whole body
Mm-hmm.
can just settle into the situation. One of the things I learned while I was researching stage fright and how it works is that that part of your brain that I was just referring to is very sensitive to faces. It's like that part of us, even I suppose as infants, where our mother's face or the people around us, the faces of the people around us, give us feedback about what is safe and what's not safe. Just like the faces at Newport when you're talking about people smiling at you, they're basically reassuring uh, your sensitive little part of your brain that's looking out for what's safe and what's not safe, and making you and you making them feel safe in that environment. So that's a
Hmm,
perfect example.
I like
And
that.
and what performing situation doesn't involve faces? There's either the people right in front of you that are looking back at you and you're reading faces that way, or you're imagining faces at in the podcast. There's all these people out there and they all have faces.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I think that's one reason why stage fright of any kind, I mean, speaking, using that word really broadly, is so common, because we're all looking out for what's safe and what's not safe.
Yeah, I like that. What's element number 3, Marty?
Element number 3 and 4 kind of go together.
Mm-hmm.
Element number 3 is to literally dismantle, with some very specific techniques, dismantle the fear response. In other words, dismantle that fight, flight, or freeze response in the face of certain triggers. And sometimes that involves just dismantling that connection in the present, but often it amounts to dismantling the similarity or the association that we have with things that have happened in the past, that we want to avoid feeling like that again.
Mm.
Right? Whatever that was for each individual, we want to kind of neutralize that response so that when, like your friend, for instance, that gets a knot in his stomach, there's some reason that getting up in front of people or speaking on, even maybe being up on stage, so maybe it's the up on stage part. Maybe he's projecting what people are going to think of him temporarily. We can make that association with the getting objective part of the detective work, what's really going on there, and
Mm-hmm.
then use some very specific energy techniques to dismantle that response. So even in the face of the trigger, the adrenal system doesn't fire off, the fight, flight, or freeze doesn't fire off. So that third element is to clear up those associations so that they're more neutral, so that
Mm.
your body doesn't read them as threatening anymore. So you don't have those symptoms anymore.
It sounds like you're reassociating that trigger with different feelings. Does that sound about right?
Yes, yes. And you're talking about 3 and 4 there together. Not step 3 is to dismantle the negative response or the painful response or the fight, flight, or freeze response in
Mm.
response to particular triggers. And number 4 is to use the same techniques, funnily enough, to reassociate those triggers with positive feelings.
I got
So
you. Okay.
one quick way to say it is to go from oh no to oh boy
Yeah, I like
in
that.
the face of the same circumstances.
That's interesting. Uh, I'm a part of this group, and they talk about something called the law of conditions. And you're in a situation where you walk out, it's on stage, like you hear something, and every time you hear that thing, a certain situation happens. And so you predispose yourself to when that noise goes off, that you feel like a certain thing is going to happen, and that predisposes you to, in this case, a negative response. And it sounds like you're almost reconditioning to that one little noise that goes off to not trigger that negative response, because just because that noise happens doesn't mean the bad thing is going to happen this time.
Yes, exactly. And
Nice.
the element there that is different is that the techniques that I use to do that have to do with not just your brain reconditioning, but your whole visceral response reconditioning, dismantling the energetic response. And when I talk about energetic response, I really mean the electrochemical, biochemical responses that you have going on, the thoughts, the feelings, everything as a package, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that the techniques that I'm using include your energy system, which is very not a conscious system. It's your visceral response. But it is a reconditioning. Yes, it's definitely a disconnection of an association in one way and a reconnection in a more beneficial and more comfortable way. Getting that impeded energy out of your way so that you can have confidence and have unimpeded energy.
I love this. I love all of this. It sounds like I've been
Good.
doing some of these things over my career and my development in the different areas I've been a part of. But I can imagine, a brand new executive director, like, hey, you got to go up and speak in front of these 40, 50, 200, 500 people, coming, plucked out of wherever they were at, maybe fresh out of school, and like, hey, you need to go talk to these people. And they're like, I gotta go talk to these people? What am I gonna do? What am I gonna say? I don't even know how to say. I'm not even sure what I want to say yet, and I've got to go talk to these people. And I can see how you would immediately close up. I think I heard somewhere that more people are scared of public speaking than are actually afraid of death.
You know where that came from?
No,
It's
where
this,
did they come from?
well, it came from in the, I think it was even in the way back in the 40s or something. There were, and it continues. There are polls that have people say, "What's your greatest fear?" Right? So there people rate their fear according to their greatest fear. Well, yes, more people say they have a fear of public speaking than they do of death, but more people have to public speak more than they have to confront death, right? We don't go around thinking about, most of the time, we don't go around thinking about how afraid we are of dying. But very often people do have to go around thinking how afraid they are of public speaking. So it's really more how frequently people rate public speaking as something that bothers them,
Mm.
which is a little different than being more afraid of public speaking than of dying. And then Jerry Seinfeld made a big joke about that, about if people are being more afraid of being of giving the eulogy than being in the coffin or something. I forget how he worded it.
That's fantastic.
So people repeat that all the time, but it's a little bit not. It's not quite how it goes.
It's like a study that says you are more likely to get in a car wreck within 20 miles of your home. Well, really, it's the same amount of percentage that you're spending time within the 20-mile radius around your home. Of course, you're going to get in more wrecks there because you're there more often.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not
Exactly.
like somehow
But that
traveling away
doesn't
from
take
your house.
that doesn't take away the fact that many people have severe fight, flight, or freeze responses to some kind of performing. It's
Mhm.
very common. So yeah.
Well, it sounds like you have a fantastic business. You have the methodology and the elements to help people overcome their stage fright. You understand how it happens. You have many stories to apply these things to. I love all of this, Marty. Where is the best place for people to find you?
My website is very easy to remember. It's stagefright.com.
Oh, That is just too simple. Stagefright.com. Go there. If you love what Marty had to say, and maybe this is something you're struggling with, drop her a line at stagefright.com. Get connected with her and see how she can help you overcome your stage fright. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Marty.
Thank you. Lots of fun to hear your stories too.